when I realized I wanted to be alone for a year, I was probably around 7. And maybe for more than 1 year when I read Alone, appropriately named by Admiral Byrd, about his time in the Antarctic. And he was alone for about 3 months, but I spent a year alone, and that was probably one of the earliest inspiration points.
Reading that book when you were 7, and then decades later living out that seed that was planted in you.
Yeah, and living it out before I got too old not to live it well.
I'm Dr. Larry Burchett, and as I see every day in the ER, life can change in a moment. On this show, we tell the stories that matter most, after which we are never the same. We got a great guest for you today, Trek Thunder Kelly. Welcome to the show, my man.
Thanks, buddy.
You have come very highly recommended.
That's because we share the same friends.
Kai did the show. He was one of the first guests, and he's like, bro, I can't do my Australian, but he's like, you got to have Trek on the show. Getting to know you, you have quite the list of, what would I call your life? The path less taken. I think it's like the escape dreams that a lot of us wish, I think, is some of the experiences you've had in life. So many things for us to pick from. We don't even know what moment we're going to choose.
Well, I'll start with what you just angled towards, which is I really, as an artist, I really learned early in my, I can't call it a career really, but early in my my enjoyment of doing art to actually live it. So I don't think of art as something that you just necessarily paint and display, but it's something that you can create as a narrative to your life. So I actually do live my life in a way that is a story that is interesting to me, so that I have something to look back on, and I have sort of chapters laid out ahead of me as well. And I just recently sort of wrote the ending to my life, so I know exactly where I'm going to, and that gives me a lot of peace, because I know I can, unless I get hit by a bus or some lightning, I know I can make it to this position. I know my end.
You're not talking about suicide. The doctor in me wants to check in with you. You wrote the ending to your life. I hope it's not soon.
I know where. No, it's. I've got about 58 years if I can make it.
Left?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. We'll see what happens. But I know where I'm going to be, and yeah, I am probably going to decide when I die. I personally want to have that choice. So when it's time, I'm going to. I'm just going to sit on a cliff in the desert somewhere and watch the sunset and smoke a doobie and take whatever I need to take, put a blanket over myself, and just let that go.
I see. So that's the setting.
That's the very end. But then, before that, I'll just end up in a shack in some weird desert town making ice cream. And I know that I can achieve that, so my goals aren't that high.
Yeah. We'll talk about physician-assisted suicide at another time. Let's talk about some of the interesting, just rattle off that stuff that you were telling me a minute ago, and let's see if we can't find one of these to focus on, unpack and talk
Sure.
about.
Well, I grew up in a family that traveled a lot. We were sort of packed into station wagons like the Griswolds and drove all over the country. My parents traveled internationally as I was a kid. They didn't take us, but I certainly had that curiosity, and I read a lot as well, so I certainly had a curiosity about the world in my early 20s, and started traveling. I got out of college, moved to Venice Beach, started working for a movie studio, left and created my own sort of commando advertising company, and then decided to be an artist, opened a gallery on Abbot Kinney, traveled the world during this whole time, and then at 39, I decided that I was going to disappear, and I told my friends and family I'd be gone for 2 to 5 years. And I sold nearly everything that I owned, and I disappeared. I traveled the world for the first year, I had a stranger choose 12 countries, and I spent a month in each country that stranger chose, and I did give backs in each country. And then I spent a year alone in the desert. Basically, I was a shepherd on the Navajo reservation for a little while. And then I saw people twice a month, and when I get supplies, but then I wanted to be even more isolated. So I figured out my caloric needs and bought enough canned food to sustain me for the rest of the year. And I chose a site on BLM land and didn't have anything to read or write with, didn't have a tent, a sleeping bag, a flashlight, or a fire. And I lived out there the rest of the year and just sort of sat under the stars. It was really a gift to be able to do that. And then the third year, I bought an old van and I drove around America because I felt like I'd seen the world, and I was so inspired by what I saw in the world. And I was also just inspired by the solitude that I'd had. So I really wanted to see my own country. And I called that project The Good in America. And so I've basically been living in my van ever since. It's been 10 years that I've been home free. So I haven't been paid rent really in 10 years. And I have storage space, which you've seen, which is basically like an art space. And then my van, and I have a membership at Gold's, and so I can just shower, and it's very easy. So what out of that sort of?
So let's open it up to the crowd. What do you guys think of those things that he mentioned?
I like the idea of talking about this isolation thing, why you want to be you're so interested in the world, but you're more interested in being isolated in the world, but you wanted to see.
Hang on. What else?
I just had a question. You said you were alone for a couple months. What was it like when the first time you used your voice after not speaking for a long time?
So that's the same
Same kind of thing.
same thing.
Something to write with.
Well,
Hang on. You liked the isolation year. You liked that one too, huh?
Yeah.
And the afterwards? What comes to you? Does anything come up for you?
Well, I'd say
Moment-wise?
one thing that I'd really recommend people is, especially in America, we're such hard workers. We only take maybe 2 weeks of real vacation a year, if you even get that. You know, you slap a day onto the edge of a weekend. You feel guilty about taking a week or two. And I would really recommend everybody, maybe you have to plan for 6 or 7 years ahead of time, or maybe at the end of each decade of your life, you give yourself a full year to travel. You just travel for that year. And it could be whatever you want it to be. And I'd also recommend that there's some meaning attached to it. So you choose something that actually has a narrative or some sort of give back or something that's inspiring to you. Because when you travel a year or more, you basically interface with the world in a much more efficient and direct manner, especially if you're alone. If you're alone, you're not carrying your home with you or someone with you that you're interacting with. You have to deal with the environment. And your senses are all flaring because there is some element of the necessity of being very aware when you travel alone. And it's important to be alert. And because you're alert, you're focusing on your surroundings, and the memories are that much more intense and indelible, and these are the memories that you're going to carry with you for the rest of your life. And that's part of the reason why I took those 3 years. You guys had talked about the year alone in the desert.
Let me do this. So I liked your chronologic thing. Let me ask you just a couple questions. We'll just kind of go through a bunch of them. I'm wondering how all of these experiences have shaped and changed you. And so I wonder, you went to college, you said you kind of grew up in a family that traveled a lot, your parents traveled, you were always interested in that. What was 20-year-old Trek like?
I mean, I really haven't grown up that much. You'd recognize the exact same guy.
Is it the same, and you just kind of had all these experiences? Have you evolved?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I've become even more comfortable in myself, and it's like Benjamin Franklin said, sort of the more you know, the more you, I can't remember the phrase, the more you know you don't know. It's paraphrasing it, but the more world I see and the more knowledge I gain, the more I understand of how much knowledge I don't have. And being curious, and especially understanding as you get older that life is coming at you pretty quickly, the end, you really start prioritizing what you do and what you can learn. And I think it's very important in a lot of cultures around the world. Americans keep death far away, but it's important to keep death very close, because death allows you to prioritize. It's not something to fear, it's something to energize you into making the right decisions. And you should keep it close, because that will make you decide, what, we do need to do this trip this year, or we do need to make these types of decisions, because you never know, one, when it's going to come, and still that time is shrinking so quickly. You should just make an outline for yourself, like a bucket list, and then just start knocking those off.
This is insane. This is the theme of the day. The guest right before you, Jack, has a semi-terminal diagnosis, and we're talking exactly about these themes, how he is exactly what you said, living the bucket list that he was otherwise pushing off to later, and living it now.
Well, those 3 years, for instance, were, I didn't really think of it that way, but it became a bucket list that I had achieved. So if something had happened after that, I would have felt like I had lived a very, very full life. And I do believe in reincarnation, because reincarnation itself doesn't have to necessarily mean that their lives after this corporeal body dies, but you can be reincarnated within your own life many times. Your signature changes over the course of your life. I lived 3 different lifetimes in those years, and I've lived a life after. I've lived several different lives before those years. And if you realize and understand that change is constant, and you can be sort of, not only can you be reincarnated in your own life, but you can have power over what that reincarnation is, it actually gives you a lot of strength in your decision making. And especially when you gain the confidence of coming back from somewhere, and everything's the same. You can walk back into a job. In fact, you'll probably get a better job because you have a better story. Because story is power, just like wealth is power. If you have a good story and you're at Aspen and Madeleine Albright's at the same table as you and the head of United Airlines, they sit in offices all day. The table's listening to the person with the best story. And once that table listens to the person with the best story, you become a colleague, and then those people become resources. So you don't have to make a lot of money to have the same sort of power as these people. You can go live a story and have the same access to the people that work very hard to sit at those tables by making money.
So how did you get to the point where, so you had a job, out of college you had a job, and then you said you did your own advertising thing, and then you opened an art studio. Take me through that really quick. And the question that I want to know, how did you get to the point where you did the 3-year, where you kind of...
Well, I graduated from UCLA, and I had racked up a couple internships, financial and otherwise, and I just wanted to do something fun, so I applied to Columbia Pictures, and I got the job as an intern. Then they created a position there for me as like basically a marketing slave. And I worked there for a year, and I started seeing where some of the money was going. And I thought, why can't I just create my own company and be sort of the basket of where some of these funds are going into? So at 24, I left. I started my own promotional advertising company and immediately got orders from a lot of the major studios, and made a lot of money at that age without a lot of real effort. And that, a lot of life is just about having the confidence to do what you want to do and have the follow through. And that was really a good lesson for me, because then I just sort of thought, I can do whatever I want. And so I bought a canvas one day and I started painting. I used to draw my Dungeons and Dragons characters as a kid, but I never really thought of it as a career. I started painting and I enjoyed it, and I was making enough money to have a gallery on Abbot Kinney, so I ran my little advertising company out of the gallery, and I'd just paint all day, and my assistant would do the work, and I'd deal with the clients. And that lasted for years, so I sort of...
How long did you do that?
About 16 years.
Oh, you did that a long time.
Yeah.
This was in the 80s and 90s?
90s and thousands, but I sort of coexisted in doing that company while also running the gallery.
What was Venice like back then, Abbot Kinney?
You know, Venice was very much the same. The spirit's very much the same as it was. I sort of chuckle when I meet people and they say, man, we want Venice how it used to be. And I ask them how long they've been here, and they've been here for 3 years. And I'm just like, the biggest change for me was around 96 to 99. Hasn't changed much since then. That was just sort of when it became, you could feel that became less dangerous than it used to be. And when I got onto Abbot Kinney in the early 2000s, there's a very cool neighborhoody vibe, a lot of mom and pop stores. Obviously, most Venetians don't like chains very much because they like the uniqueness of everything about Venice, including the storefronts. Mm-hmm. You know, and I was one among several vendors that started First Fridays around 2005. And back then it was more focused on the stores, in that we'd all have parties. And we'd stay over and late, and people could buy things at a discount. So the whole street was a bunch of parties, but mostly neighbors that you knew. And I would try to get my friends to move into Venice, and a lot of them just didn't want to move down there. It's too gritty. Mm-hmm. But you started to see a change after a while. And I started doing parties with Vanity Fair and Red Bull Vodka and Campari and having these really cool art openings. And my friends started moving down here. And the funny thing about Venice is people tend to stay in Venice. So you move to Venice, and then if you want to move again, you stay in Venice, but you just move somewhere else in Venice. Mm. For me, it's a perfect collision of creativity and the beach that California has to offer. Because if you go up north very far, it gets colder. You have access to all of the resources of Los Angeles here. And if I'm going to live in a coastal city, I want to be next to the water. And even where my art space is now, I do find that I miss the sunsets if I'm there too much. So I'll try to spend the night here at least a few nights a week if I can.
You don't feel, these people been here 3 years like me, oh, it's not like it used to be. It's pretty pricey to have a storefront on Abbot Kinney.
Now it is, yeah. I mean, my space was probably $2,000 a month, and now spaces that size are going for around $40,000 a month.
That's kind of crazy.
And I was going to buy it for a little under $1 million in 2003, and now it's worth $35 million.
That is so insane. That part's changed a little bit.
It has changed. And
but you feel like the spirit is
it's still
the
here.
same.
And, you know, as we talked about earlier, change is going to happen, and you can either be flattened by it or you can be a part of it. Those are your only two choices. So if there's something you want to change, then you become a part of that shift.
You don't
it's
feel
always
like resisting this or the Googles.
No, man. I go
whatever.
in there and, well, I mean, I would go in and talk to them and ask them to be more imaginative in how they spend their money.
Yeah.
You know, like if I was going to be Adidas and have a storefront there, I wouldn't even sell anything out of that store. They have the reason why they have that storefront is it's operating at a loss. There's not enough parking to sustain that store. They just want a storefront on a popular area like Soho or Beverly Hills,
Sure.
Venice, Abbot Kinney. Now, if they're smart, since they aren't even making any money off of that, do sort of what Blake Mycoskie did with Tom's, but even take it further, where it's just a performance space. It's a hangout space. You do Adidas, you know, artists take Adidas things and make, you know, are inspired by Adidas to make art out of it. There's poetry readings, music, a coffee bar. Then Adidas is cool. Then Adidas should be on Abbot Kinney. That's how these stores should play it. Is just something so unusual and unique that they actually get publicity. It becomes a part of the community. People in the community use it. That's the right attitude for me if you're going to come into Venice.
That's a great idea. So you, for 16 years, you had your company, you had your art gallery. When did you get to the point where it was time to change that?
Well, I grew up on survival stories that my father would feed me as a kid. Everything from Hugh Glass to Admiral Byrd. And I also grew up reading Tarzan books, and I just like the idea of just being out and alone and adventuring. And so I just felt like I'd done LA to the extent that I could do it. Like I had a successful gallery, I was throwing big parties, I was painting a lot of really cool art, and I just sort of thought, you know what, it's time. It's time to go. And it's better to go when you're on top, because then you feel the power of that decision than when circumstance forces you to make a decision. So I had a fair amount of money at the time saved. I had some art sales that potentially were going to make me more, and I just thought, you know what, it's time. And the best thing to do when you make a decision like that is to almost announce it, because then you're forced to be responsible for it and people start believing it. And then in a way you don't want to let the people down. So I allowed myself to feel the pressure of my publicly making this decision almost a year before. Like, I'm going to disappear on this date. And I just started telling everybody, and they're like, you really are? I'm like, yeah, I'm going to go. I'm just going to go.
What do you mean disappear?
Well, I didn't have contact with almost anybody for years. They didn't know where I was. I just walked off and I was gone.
I think like the average person would understand wanting to get away and have an adventure and all this stuff, but still would want to keep in contact with people close. So this is a very foreign idea to me, the disappearance part.
Sure, because we live for only 100 years out of all of human existence, are we so interconnected that seems weird. But for any time before 1900 or 1860 or so, you walked out there that door, no one knew where you were till you came back, especially if you went somewhere. If you went on an ocean voyage, your family might get a note that was handed to 3 different people 3 years after they'd given it to you. So traveling until very recently was alone, and you didn't know, your family didn't know if you were going to come back. And I personally wanted to have I just want the freedom of being unfettered, and there's a power. There's stupidity in it for sure, but there's also a power in knowing that you're the end of the line. If this canoe turns over and you're in the river systems of Papua New Guinea, and you're
on the edge.
Yeah, you're always on the edge. So you're very alert, aware, alive, and when you make it past death a lot, or when you brush up against death a lot, and you do as a doctor in a different way, it makes you feel strong. It makes you feel powerful. It makes you potentially even make even riskier choices, which I continued to do.
Escalate.
Yeah, just for that testing of fate.
So you get the idea that you're going to disappear for some long period of time.
2 to 5 years, I figured.
Where did you go first? What did you do first?
Well, I wanted to have some sort of structure to that disappearance. I didn't want to necessarily just go sit on a beach, and that's why I think meaning-driven travel is very important. In fact, meaning-driven anything is important.
Like intentional?
Yes, we as humans are meaning-needing creatures. We need to feel value. We need to have a direction or a goal. It makes us feel more stable. I personally like things that inspire me. So I thought, okay, so I have these 3 years, what should I do? So I thought, okay, I want to have chance involved as well somehow. So I had a stranger choose 12 countries, and I spent a month in each country that stranger chose for the first year. And I did givebacks, which were really, really inspiring and helpful. And I'd recommend if people travel, they do a giveback at the beginning of their journey, because then they have the connections of that give back within the country, and then you'll have all these adventures you would have never imagined.
So wait a minute, you need to explain both of those a little bit more. Where would you find the stranger, and how would you get them to give you the next destination?
Well, everything begins with a question. Everything. In fact, your mind sits sort of idling until you give it something to focus on, and then all of that experience and all of its ability sort of orientates itself towards that answer. So once you know one question, then you ask the next one. So I thought, okay, well, I'll have a stranger choose 12 countries. Where will I find that stranger? How about somewhere that's historically significant? Maybe Jerusalem. There's a lot of collisions of cultures there. And so I thought, okay, I'll fly to Jerusalem. When will I fly to Jerusalem? I chose a numerological date that seemed interesting, the summer solstice. So I flew to Jerusalem on the summer solstice. I walked around Old Jerusalem in the morning, waiting, wondering, feeling dumb sometimes, like, who am I going to ask for this? And no shopkeeper, no one even looked at me in any of those corridors of Old Jerusalem. And I was up in the old Jewish quarter and someone tapped me on the back. And I just thought, whoever this is, could be a shopkeeper, could be a tourist, whoever this is, I'm going to ask them to choose 12 countries for me.
That one person chose the 12? Oh, I thought it was like one in each place would choose the next one. So, and that was the person.
So I turned around, there's a little beggar with an eye patch, and he spoke a little English, and I said, listen, I'll give you some money, but I need you to make some decisions for me. Is there anywhere that we could go that's quiet and sort of cool? He's like, yes, follow me. So we wove our way through the warrens of Old Jerusalem, out through the New Gate, through the Muslim cemetery, following him down through the Mount of Olives, past Absalom's temple, into the old Jewish graveyard, and there's this low, sort of shallow cave with two graves on it, raised up, just sort of falling apart, and we sat on them, and I had about 195 numbers on a list, just listed out. Those each corresponded to a different country in my hotel room, and I just gave him a pin, and I said, circle 12 numbers. And so I circled the 12 numbers, and then those corresponded to the 12 countries I'd spend the next year in.
And you did that, huh?
Mm-hmm.
What were they?
Well, some of them I'd already been to, but when you make these choices, you can't cheat. And especially you can't cheat.
I feel like I would have.
You
he would have been like,
well,
he go to, you know,
he chose place. I thought
some lame thing. I'm like, nah, this one's out.
Yeah, and I'd been to several of them, and I just thought, wow, I've already been there, and this is my year to travel. But once you make a creative decision, you have to go through with it, because otherwise it taints everything else that you do. So when I got back to the hotel room, the order that I did the countries in weren't the order that I chose them. I chose to do them in a way that would make sense. So the order that I did them in was Bhutan, Papua New Guinea, Australia, Cambodia, Namibia, Mauritania, Germany, Finland, Brazil, Ecuador, El Salvador, and Haiti were the 12. And then I needed my why. So I knew where I was going, but why am I going? What's the reason? Why am I doing this? So I remember that there are two keys on the ground.
The story.
Yeah. There's two little old skeleton keys just on the ground that I remembered when we were sitting on those graves. I thought, you know what? I'll use the key as a totem, and I'll get 12 keys, and I'll give a key to someone in each country that has been meaningful to me, or that I feel like is an amazing person in some way. And so then I had my quest. And in each country, I would either, through working with people or meeting people, I was sort of looking for that recipient of the key. And I'd tell them, listen, this key has been traveling the world to find you. Keep this for good luck. This is something that's important to me, and it's meant for you. Mm-hmm. In a lot of countries, they believe in the meta-realities, which aren't just the main reality that a lot of secular America believes in. And so the idea for them that this key is traveling the world to get to them, to bring them luck, they take very seriously, and they take into their homes and their families. But then I needed the 12 keys. So two countries that stranger didn't choose were that I wanted to go to were India and China. So I flew to China. When I left, walked out of my gallery, I flew to China, sold everything, did the same sort of thing. I had a model from what happened in Jerusalem. So I just was out on the street, and this kid drives by on a Cyclo, speaks some English, and I'm like, dude, I need you to choose 6 keys for me. And so he's like, okay. So we drove behind Tiananmen Square into this area where there's a lot of sort of antique stores, and he chose 6 keys of the Han Dynasty. It cost me $1,200, but I couldn't influence his choices. So it was $1,200 for the first 6 keys. And then I went to Calcutta in India, and similarly, I met this old man, and I said, I need you to choose 6 keys. And he said, what are these for? I said, they're going to bring good luck to people around the world. And he took that very seriously. He spent about 3 hours near Mother Teresa's tomb. There are these stores that have these piles of just rusty keys for some reason, and he dug through those piles for hours until he found the 6 keys that were meaningful to him. So then I had my keys, I had my quest, I said goodbye to everybody on the internet, and I flew to Bhutan, and I was gone.
I want a key. It's interesting to hear you set the quest, as you call it. You know, first you're finding somebody to pick all of these places, but by creating this structure, how that engages you in a certain way on the very thing. It's really interesting. Did you ever see that movie Memento?
I did.
It's reminding me of that.
Yeah, you can live your life sort of backwards and forwards.
You know what I'm talking about? The
Yeah.
guy would like,
Yeah.
he had no long-term, he wouldn't remember things, and he would tattoo stuff on him, like clues for the next thing, and you watched the movie backwards, and you could see how he created, I mean, his ended up being a goose chase that went nowhere, but you could end up just seeing how he created the next thing. And
But this is also a metaphor for how to live life. You know, you make some sort of decisions, you let chance have a little bit of, which it will anyway, but you sort of interpret chance for yourself in a beneficial way, and then you live it, and you have certain points. It's like a reality TV show. You hit these certain points, but the show is what happens between those points. So I knew where I was going. I knew sort of what I wanted to find, but a lot of the lessons that you learn are not what you expect if you're open to learning those lessons.
I'm thinking about openness as you're talking about chance and kind of leaving all these big decisions. Man, I'm like, could I let a stranger pick the destination? If I was going to take a year, man, I would want to pick where. You know, like letting go of that.
You know what one of my things I was going to do that would be more aligned with your profession is I might even do it in the future, but one of the things I was thinking about doing was, and this was before the movie Bucket List came out, but I was going to find some people, perhaps some kids who don't have long to live. And I was going to tell them, hey guys, maybe 3. I'm going to say, I want you to make a list of all the things you want to do. Everything you can think of that you want to do, everywhere you want to go. I want you to make a list. And I'm going to spend the next year living your dreams, and we're going to be connected on social media. I'm going to send you videos, pictures.
Oh, they're not going to go. I thought you were going to take them.
No, but if I'm talking about people that are really they're not going to be able to see these dreams, which would be amazing also to take them as well, but how many parents are going to let you take them away for a year?
I see what you're saying. I feel like if I were that kid, I would be like, that guy, I wish I could do that. It would hurt.
Or I was thinking about, and this is probably
take the kid,
internationally
make a wish
fraudulent.
for me foundation.
Yeah, no, I mean for sure do that if you can take them on these little trips. If I want something longer. The other thing I was thinking about doing was finding someone who is also perhaps going to pass away that sort of looked like me and say, hey, listen, man, give me your dreams. And once you pass, I'm going to be you. I'm going to take all your identification. I'm going to live your dreams as you out in the world. I mean, these are the things I think of.
I
but
shouldn't
it's sort
be
of crazy,
expecting anything less to come out of your brain, child.
Yeah.
So that was 12 months on the quest with the keys.
And then I did the year in the desert. Yeah.
And then, so wait a minute. So at the end of that, how was that? How did that conclude?
Well, at the end of the last country that man chose, I was done. And then I knew that my next year was a year alone in the desert, so I was preparing for that.
Where did you come up with that idea?
I don't know.
Different ideas.
Well, I thought I want to travel the world. I thought, you know what? I need to experience solitude. I need to experience not 40 days in the desert alone. I need to experience at least a year.
Why? Nobody wants. Who's done that?
I'm standing on a mountaintop in Bhutan with, I did sort of a spiritual journey of Bhutan, and Kelzang, sort of like my guide. We were up on top of this mountain, and we look across, and there is a little tiny hut on this other peak with these prayer flags above it, super isolated, just a little hut. I thought it might be a temple or something, and of course, down these steep ridges, way down there is this little town in the green of the valley. And so I asked Kelzang, what is that? Is that a temple? He goes, oh no, the hermit lives up there. I'm like, really? And I said, well, how does he eat? And he says, well, the village brings him food every day. And it's a long hike. But basically, he's doing the spiritual work of the community in the valley. And so they pay him to do the work of the village, the spiritual work. And I said, does he ever see them? He goes, no, he hides when they're coming. I said, how long has he been up there? He goes, 15 years.
No kidding.
15 years on that little windy rock.
Solitude, 15
And so I
years.
just thought, a year, it's easy.
Ah, that guy.
It was easy.
If he could do 15.
I can do. Well, I will say just real quickly, because I've been asked if I had made art on the road, and my perspective on that is because I was living a narrative that I had sort of chosen beforehand. I was actually living the art itself, that the experience was the art, and however that experience manifested itself in terms of how I exhibited or shared the experience with others was the art itself. What was really interesting about that was basically you knew the names of the chapters of a book that you had put together, but you didn't know what was going to happen within each chapter.
The 12, you're talking about the 12
Yeah,
different
or
countries.
anything, or even the whole project. Like I knew the names of those chapters, but I didn't know what was going to happen inside. So I had some sort of piece and structure. Like I knew the table of contents of what my next 3 years would be, but I didn't know what was going to happen within those chapters. And I even knew the names of those chapters, where I was going to go or what I was looking for. But what you think you're going to find is never really what you're going to find, and that's what the beauty of adventure is.
There is an openness to the way that you go about this adventure that I think gives a lot of us anxiety, imagining we would be in that. And the question is, how are you okay with that? How does that work for you?
I don't know. I guess I have a overinflated confidence, or just I don't get lonely. Like I just love meeting new people, and I love being alone, you know? So I knew that year alone in the desert wasn't going to be something that would be difficult for me. And I thought, hey, am I going to go crazy out there? And then I just thought, oh, you already are crazy, so I didn't even have to worry about that. So it just took it off. Those worries that were just taken off the shelf as I thought about them beforehand, you know? And I chose to take a vow of silence in the desert because I thought, oh man, am I going to start talking to myself? And then I chose, I took that off the shelf by saying I was going to take a vow of silence. So I couldn't even talk to myself.
Beforehand?
Yeah. Yeah. Like you go over it's like putting on a seatbelt or counting the exit rows. You look at the potential obstacles that you're going to deal with, and then whether they're emotional or mental or physical, and then you try to plan for them.
Anticipate.
Yeah, and
which is interesting because that's actually being surprisingly practical on a spiritual level about what you're dealing with. But I think a lot of us, again, would still anticipate and fear. But I don't hear a lot of fear as you're recounting.
No, there wasn't any fear. That's probably another fault of mine that's going to get me into trouble one day. But I have discretion more than fear. Like, I have an alertness, a discretion when I'm in very dangerous situations. It's not a fear. It's certainly not paralyzing. I just think, okay, what are my options here? And I try to think about what the options are before I go into that situation. Obviously, traveling the world, I learned a lot of travel hacks, survival hacks I still use today. Mm-hmm. Being alone in the desert, I learned a lot of insights and sort of life hacks that I still use today. And these are things I would have never experienced, although you can read about them. So reading is a proxy for experience, and that's why it's very important. It's the second best thing you can get to actual experience. But when you have those experiences, you have epiphanies that you would have never imagined. And that's what's amazing about it, because the things that I thought that I learned were very different from the things that I actually learned.
So did you meet this spiritual master who was 15 years?
No, I never saw him. But I will say I did have a sort of spiritual guide. Well, I spent time with shaman. There's a lot of people call him shaman around the world, and I actually apprenticed briefly and was aided by a Navajo shaman before I went alone in the desert, who did some rituals for me, rituals that I also participated in. These rituals are meant not only to protect you, but to put you in the right mindset, so that when you go do these things that you feel, whether real or not, you feel a type of you feel like you have a type of shield with you that you're carrying, or a talisman of good luck. And then, once you're out in the desert, you do start having lucid, sober hallucinations after a while. And that may be partly your mind needing to find companionship. My father's a nuclear physicist, so I came from a very fact-based past and a fact-based family. And I was interested in sort of crossing over into those meta-real realms that I didn't have any experience with through my family history. And what I realized out in the desert is the paradox of allowing both my father to be right simultaneously with these medicine men that believe in multiple layers of reality, that I need to allow them both to be simultaneously right for me to walk into what became a very interesting experience within my own imagination, which my father would consider it, and within the meta-real realms of spirits, which is what the shaman would consider it. So I had a lot of experiences out there that I surrendered to that were very visceral and real. And I understand them as my imagination, but I understand how they could be interpreted as actually walking through various dimensions and having real interaction with what others would call spirits.
Is this, I mean, you're talking about like plant-based medicine
Nope.
and drugs? Like
I'm talking about being alone, being sober, nothing.
So, okay, where did you go for this year alone? And what did that look like? I'm trying to imagine.
Well,
what you were doing
in the same
already.
way that I planned my, once I had that model and it worked of just asking questions, letting fate help determine things, I just drove into an area of the desert I wanted to be in. I knew I wanted to live in a Hogan. I started asking people on the Navajo reservation if anybody had a Hogan.
And where is this?
This is a Monument Valley area of Utah, southern Utah, northern Arizona.
Okay.
A very desolate area in terms of population, very beautiful area. And I knew if I wanted to be in the desert, I wanted to be in a beautiful area as opposed to the desert between here and Vegas. So I just showed up and I started asking. I knew generally what I wanted. I immediately found a family that had a Hogan about 14 miles in, and they had a flock of sheep, and they said, listen, you can be up there, but you need to take care of our sheep. And so basically, I chose to wear all white that year as well. And since I was going to be alone, just to grow out all my body hair and see what I would look like after a year of. So my beard got, long hair, and
Looked like a shepherd.
yeah. And I took care of those that flock. I had 3 sheepdogs. I lived in a mud Hogan, which is sort of like a mud igloo. But like I said, a few months in, I spent the winter in there, and there's a lot of stories related to that. A few months in, I wanted to be even more isolated because I'd sleep with the sheep at night under the stars with Monument Valley around me, and I had the sheep dogs, and we were all like a team, and it was fun. I wasn't getting the absolute aloneness, and I'd see people twice a month when I'd go down for supplies as well. And sometimes the family would come up and just make sure everything was okay. And I just wanted absolute isolation. So that's when I figured out my caloric needs. I met a Navajo family that, basically their father was part of a project that he said, listen, there's some land. I helped them with their lambs during lambing season with their sheep. So I helped them for a couple weeks. He said, listen, you know what? There's a place out there that you could go. And so I used his ranch as a sort of springboard to go find a place. I didn't really tell them where I was going to be, but then one day I got all my stuff and I just went out into the desert. And then I hiked in. I drove everything I needed out there. I hid it. I built like a big box and hid it. And then I hiked in, and I hiked up onto this plateau, and I built my shelter on this plateau. And I could see my food about a mile away, hidden. But I'd go down once a week with 2 jerry cans in my backpack to fill up with the canned food.
I see.
And then every day, you're forced to confront yourself, which was amazing. There's nothing to read. You do start, at least I started nesting, like creating my den. You feel these instincts. When you peel civilization away, you realize how much of your behavior is actually instinct, which is an enormous amount of our behavior. Mm-hmm. You stop having an inner dialogue in terms of language because it's so inefficient. The way we talk, one word after another, it's very linear. And you have these conversations in your head, and after being alone a while, they just go away. So you are thinking in images and senses. It's very quick. Your senses are alert. You've made your den. You're literally, you can smell better. You can hear better. You notice things. You're way more patient. That's why humans are such amazing hunters, is because we can walk into a herd of elk, and if they get spooked, then you just stop, and you stop for like a half an hour or 45 minutes, and they forget. They have a short-term memory. Then you get a little closer, and over 3 hours, you can get within spear range of a herd of elk just by taking your time and getting in there quietly, because they forget. Plenty of weird insights. Like I feel like I know where religion comes from. Basically, I'll tell you what my opinion is. As animals, we need to be able to recognize something dangerous in an array of information. The animals that can recognize something dangerous in that array of information live longer.
Threat.
So what we're able to do, humans, I can't speak for anybody else, or at least me, you can look at an array of visual information and you can see a face. Now faces, whether it's an ant face or a spider face or a raccoon or a bear, they're all very different from each other, but we can spot it in a millisecond, because that ability to make that decision on that discovery is what's going to help you survive. Now this ability to see faces in things translates into, oh, I see a face in the tree bark. I see a face in the clouds. I see a face in this rock. I see a face in the pattern of the moss on this stump. And when you see a face, you start anthropomorphizing. Oh, there's a spirit in that tree. I see a face. Now you put humanness in that tree because you have this recognition factor. And that's where animism comes from, which is considered the first sort of world religion, is ascribing human qualities to something that's not human. Mm-hmm. The god of the sky, the sprite of the forest.
Yeah.
And that's where we start extrapolating personality into inanimate objects. Then we assign those meaning, and that meaning becomes the various religions that we have today over time.
You kind of found yourself recreating this in your time.
Well, I just noticed things like this I would probably have never understood before unless you're just sitting there with nothing to do. And then you do create. For me, I did create. I would make ornaments and hang them in the trees. I would spend a month collecting white rocks and make a white rocks riverbed art installation down the side of the hill. I would make all these weird temples everywhere, and I'd walk to each temple at each time of the day and just sort of sit in the temples that I made out of I had a knife, and I'd spend hours just cleaning the boulders which had patterns of lichen on them, but I wouldn't change nature. I would just clean nature up so these patterns would become even more specific on those boulders. And you really learn to appreciate the animals. Like, I have a huge respect for ants. Ants are amazing. I spent hours and days and weeks just following, and beetles, man. I followed this beetle for like 8 miles. I mean, these have an amazing sense of direction. This beetle would just go and then walk around the boulder and hit its vector line on the other side and just keep going. How does this thing know exactly? And it would vary in its change very little. So you watch the birds, you you know what the animals do at night. I would go out once a month at full moon, and I'd cover myself in this clay that was near my site, which is sort of volcanic, and almost like the Aborigines of Australia, I would go stalk the desert each full moon because I just wanted to be the apex predator there. And it was mostly for my own like emotional edification. But I just go pee all over my territory, and I figured I had my knife on me. If something attacked me, I'd just stab it and die and go down like Brad Pitt in Legends of the Fall. And once you go and sort of own your area, then the first 3 or 4 weeks when I was there, I was a little bit vulnerable and a little scared. And after I stalked the desert that first night under the moonlight, out alone, nobody knew where I was. I would squat in these Anasazi ruins in the darkness with my beard in the moonlight, and you just feel like, okay, I can do this. This is it. This is my area.
After that, you didn't feel unsafe. You were never
No, I
attacked
slept
by
very well
animals.
after that. Yeah.
Did you sleep out in the open?
No, I slept in my shelter. There wasn't any real barrier if something wanted to get in. And like I said, I had routines. If you set up routine, it helps you to stay sort of sane. I had a workout routine. I got these lava rocks that had a lot of iron in them. I got them about the same weight, and so I had my lava rocks. I'd go.
You could do some Fred Flintstone curls.
I did. There's a old windmill about 2.5 miles away. I'd go do pull-ups on, and I had my ritual each Sunday. I had my ritual each month.
Thinking like these basics of bathing and toilet paper, brushing your teeth.
Well, I realized as it was getting later in that if you run out of toilet paper, that's really the end of civilization. Especially when you live in the desert where there's no leafy things and it's mostly prickly things. So I had to realize that I had to be careful with my allotment after a while and just be smart about it. But I'd take I'd bathe myself once every Sunday, and I looked forward to that. I marked time on my staff.
Was it cold? How long were you up there on this time where you didn't go back and see people?
Oh, I did about 5 months on the Navajo reservation as a shepherd, and I did a little over 6 months up alone, and then I had sort of and this is where we get into the meta-real zone of the layers that I crossed over into in my imagination, and had these crazy relationships with the spirits on that plateau, which was considered a relatively dangerous area to a lot of the Navajo. And I spent a month in Death Valley because I had a task that I had to do in Death Valley, and that was basically my year.
So you went 6 or 7 months where you didn't talk to anybody?
Yeah.
Did you get lonely? Did you miss
Not
people?
at all. No, man.
You didn't miss people?
Nah.
Why'd you come back?
Because my year is over. And that's the nice thing about choosing a year. It's just long enough to own it, but it's short enough that you can always see the end coming, so you can make it. And especially when you have an end on something, just like death, it allows you to appreciate what you have, because I'm never going to spend a year alone in the desert again. I could, but I may not. So I have to enjoy every moment, because the end is coming, and then I'm going to do something new. That's why it's good to have endings on things, so you can really be there to enjoy what you're experiencing.
I was going to ask you something else, but then I was actually listening to what you were saying. Did you use a calendar? How did you keep track of days?
I just had a staff, and I marked the days.
I'm just thinking this all the way out.
And then basically, I can make the segue for you, unless you want to stay there.
Well, Mike,
So basically, when I left, the first thing I did is that rancher that I befriended, he drove all the way from near Grants or wherever to pick me up. My stuff, I had met this Navajo family. They're super cool. My stuff was up in Utah. He drove me. We went straight to a cafeteria, and I just ate everything that I could. It's called Golden Corral. And I went straight to the chocolate fountain, And because I ate cold canned food for months and months and months, just cold canned food.
Did you hunt anything?
There wasn't really, I did make some snares and, you know, there wasn't much out there. I would not have survived without the aid of canned food.
And so when it ended, I mean, how did you feel when it ended?
I felt great. I did everything that I could out there. You know, I wanted to experience things, so I had deprivations at the end of each sort of segment. So I blindfolded myself for a week because I was curious what that sensory deprivation of being alone and blind in the desert would be. And then, and then I also had some earplugs from Germany that were you know, that were very efficient. So I was without hearing for a week. And I did the full Helen Keller blindfold and no hearing for another week. And then I did sleep deprivation, sleep, food, and water all at the same time. I was so exhausted by that time that was really the toughest week, and that was near the end. But these are different exercises that are done in many world thought traditions, many religions, in order to give you a different perspective. Like, what am I going to learn from this? And I learned things from each one. And there's a pain element that I didn't have. Most world religions and thought traditions have some sort of pain element, like wearing this itchy shirt, you know, or flagellating yourself. So I thought, maybe I'll wear a barbed wire collar because there's a bunch of barbed wire around there. And that next day I was walking and there was a barbed wire collar on a fence post, and I just picked it up and put it on.
Jesus' crown of thorns.
Put around the neck, and I wore that for 100 days. And that was interesting.
So wait a minute, so you said you learned a lot. What did you learn from all these deprivation
you know, each had its lessons. So the barbed wire collar was, you know, it's hard to sleep and these metal spikes are sticking in your face. You learn that it's sort of like a bad relationship. So you get so used to this thing around your neck that sometimes I'd have to take it off to like change because I didn't want my clothes ripping on this thing. I'd take it off for a second just to put a jacket on or whatever. And I would feel this anxiety because something was missing. I didn't feel comfortable. Something was missing.
Change.
And I realized that this thing that gave me pain, I preferred the familiarity of having that pain than not having that pain. So it's like a bad relationship, you know? You're with someone, and even though it's awful, you prefer the familiarity of their, of them being with you than to have it gone. You know, when you're blind, you really have to think about where you put things, and that's obvious.
Not to laugh at the blind,
but I had to organize things so that I know exactly where I put them. And if you lost something, it was gone forever. And when you take the blindfold off a week later, it's right there. You've been going like this for a week, and it's right there. And so you had to be very careful. I had to like map out and I had a staff, so I mapped out my area. And that was the only time that I felt really sort of lonely. I realized how much sight and being able to, the sky gave me a lot of company. It was always changing with clouds, and I'd watch these thunderstorms. I'd watch a blue sky in the morning, and these distant mountains, the moisture gets sucked up into the air, and these big clouds form, and then later in the day, these clouds would get bigger and bigger and more full with moisture, and these thunderstorms would go raging across the desert, and under the skirts of rain, the desert would make paths of green under the exact trail of the thundercloud, a path of green that would be gone the next day, and then always rainbows. And when the thunderstorms ended and the rainbows came out, the coyotes everywhere would go nuts. They just loved after the storm, man. Just little tiny things that you'd never imagine.
Nah,
you know?
I would never imagine any of these things.
Rattlesnakes in the mornings, almost every morning, would just lay themselves out, stretched out to get the morning sun, and they're super safe then because they can't strike. So they're just extended. So you could just get up against these rattlesnakes and you know, I'm not going to fuck with it, but you know, you learn how to exist with the creatures around you. When I first came into my area, the birds would chirp and the animals would bark warnings that I was there. Within a couple months, I was accepted by the animals in the area, and they would make warnings when some other alien or stranger was in our area. I could walk through my area in silence.
Part of the environment. When you came out of this, do you remember the first person you talked to?
The rancher.
What was that like, using your voice again?
Well, 2 months in, I was trying to howl at the coyotes, and I lost my voice, and I realized that I better start exercising my vocal cords, so I started singing every day.
I see.
And that helped me get my voice back.
So you do that year
And I did the Good in America after
of
that.
Solitude. What time are we at?
An hour.
You're not going to be able to tell that story. We'll have to give me a 2-minute thing on that,
On what?
if that's even possible.
Well, I came out, and I want to see my own country, and
Was this right after the year?
Directly after. I did them all in succession. Year around the world, year in the desert, year in America.
Those are the 3.
Yes, and then the year in America, I sort of plugged back into society. I got an old van. I spent a week in every state in America trying to make a non-contiguous path. A contiguous path without overlapping. I had strategies for how I would see each state. I thought I was going to have money to do that, and I didn't. My original quest was to go see the Good in America, but what happened is I didn't have any money at that point, so I had to also rely on the Good in America to make it across the country. And I thought I'd have to get small jobs here and there just to keep going, but people were donating me money on the internet and giving me money at gas stations and inviting me into their homes and everywhere. Just the kindest, most amazing people in the world. And one of the big lessons from this is how kind and giving, and how people even put themselves at risk just to ensure your safety. Total strangers. Most people in the world, like a large percentage, and we are inundated by media that just shows how awful we are. And I had to rely on strangers' compassion and kindness for my life in many, many instances, and I'm thankful to them. And that just means that I have to, when I see someone that needs help, I have to pay it forward.
I don't really know that. We could run these tapes forever and not stop. Half the time you're telling the story, and I'm imagining the movie. This is a series of movies.
There's a
Trek
lot.
Thunder Kelly experience.
Yeah, I was lucky, I guess, that I was given this name. That was a kickoff into just living asymmetrically, really, because I didn't have the same names as anybody else, and that helped me just start to form that independence of spirit that I think everybody should explore. Because the more that you have, the more that you can give.
It's been great. Thanks for coming on the show, brother. You want to close this out? Do you want people to follow you? Do you want them to go to Instagram or anything, or do you what?
Yeah, follow me on Instagram. It's just at Trek Thunder Kelly. It's mostly just pictures of travels around the world. I just shoot with my phone, but taking photographs, especially with the phone, has enabled me to see life in a different way, and that I sort of see beauty everywhere. So each image is an instant of the world as the way that I see it. And I just hope that you guys maybe get some ideas from what we've talked about today and make some decisions that are inspiring to you. And don't really worry about what other people think about your story. It's for you, and the right people that are inspired by it are going to be the ones that are going to be connected to you. So thanks again.
God, what a great show. I want you to do a screenshot, tag me, Dr. Larry Burchett, on Instagram or social media. I will reply if you tag me and post on that. Hope you enjoyed the show. If you or somebody you know has a moment, reach out to me, subscribe, share this stuff on YouTube and Apple Podcasts. We will see you next time. So I remember being frozen in the car and seeing all of this happening. And God, I'm even getting the little chibis, imagining it again. But so I'm like frozen in the back seat. I was gonna take a nap. I didn't have my seatbelt on. Yeah. Cars skidding back and forth. And the next thing I know,
is I see out the windows sky, grass, sky, and then it's black.